We're delighted to welcome our own Dr. Steve Blake. Dr. Blake is the author of Vitamins and Minerals Demystified, published by McGraw-Hill, a nutritional approach to Alzheimer's disease and the recent arthritis relief, as well as understanding dietary fats and oils and healing medicine. He also co-authored Mosby's Drug Guide for Nurses, 4th edition. He is the creator of the Herb Doctors, with worldwide medical plant information, as well as the Diet Doctor software for assessing dietary nutrients. Dr. Blake's presentation tonight is entitled No More Heart Attacks. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Steve Blake.
Thank you. Let's get started getting rid of heart attacks in America. They're really not necessary. Tonight, I'm going to go over some steps you can take to lower your risk of heart attacks to near zero, perhaps even to zero. First of all, I'm going to talk about lowering inflammation. Now, you thought I was going to talk about cholesterol first thing, probably. But instead, I'm going to talk about inflammation because new research is showing that heart disease is an inflammatory problem. Of course, saturated fat and blood cholesterol are part of the problem too. I'm going to talk about antioxidants because antioxidants help protect our arteries just as they help protect our brains and our kidneys and every other part of our body. We've all heard about omega-3s and omega-6s. These two families of fatty acids regulate inflammation. They also regulate how our blood vessels open or close, the very blood vessels that might someday cause a heart attack in your heart. They also regulate these eicosanoids, called thromboxanes, regulate the thickness of the blood, the clotting of the blood. So this omega-3, omega-6 ratio is very, very crucial, and I'll tell you a lot about that tonight. How can you tell if you're going to get a heart attack, and how can you avoid one? That's what this talk tonight is about. Huge numbers of deaths, huge numbers of heart attacks in America, 34 million worldwide, and just in America, probably 1 million heart attacks if you count the ones that don't involve hospitalizations. 600,000 deaths yearly from heart disease, and strokes are closely related. Now, this talk is not specifically about strokes, but the ischemic strokes, where a flap of plaque breaks off in the brain and causes a loss of blood supply to part of your brain, this is a very similar cause to heart disease in general. Now, if you wanted to get a heart attack, you couldn't do it on one end of the spectrum here where the arteries are still open. These are little time snapshots starting perhaps at age 4, because you have to go that young on an American diet to find a kid with really open, undamaged arteries. Somewhere between age 4 and 8, fatty streaks start occurring on the inside of the arteries, and then these progressively get worse and worse. It's really amazing that the human body can endure 40 or 50 years of this before getting to a heart attack. We're really well made. So the first step is that we have excess oxidized LDL, and I'll bet most of you know that LDL stands for low density lipoproteins, and that they're the bad cholesterol. They're actually cholesterol carriers, not even really just cholesterol, but I'll talk more about those as we go. When this LDL gets oxidized, it sticks to the inside of the artery, especially if there's more adhesion, and I'll mention one vitamin that lowers adhesion. And then the inside of the artery becomes inflamed, and this inflammation goes throughout the entire process as the arteries clog up. The LDL stuck at the inside of the artery is then attacked by our immune system cells. And the mast cells, the macrophages go in there and cause this foamy accumulation of cholesterol and calcium that hardens the arteries and clogs the arteries. Once they're clogged and hardened, the heart attack can occur if a flap of this plaque breaks off and blocks blood flow to part of the heart. And that's what we like to avoid. So if you just reverse all these things, then you don't have to worry about heart attacks. Now, one other thing about heart disease is it's very expensive. I don't know if your doctors have installed ATM machines in their offices, but this cartoon has one. This chart was done by our own Dr. Bill Harris, and it shows that if you eat more plant foods, your risk of heart attack is lower. And if you want a takeaway message from this talk tonight, as you'll see as I go on and on, eat more plant foods and your hearts will be healthier, your arteries will be healthier. And I'll go over why that is. Now, are heart attacks really necessary? Well, in the China study, and especially in this paper, which T. Colin Campbell was one of the authors, they looked at a province in China called Guizhou County. 250,000 men under 65 lived there for 3 years and not one of them got a heart attack. In America, there would be 738 men on the average that would have gotten heart attacks, but none of them did. And it's not that Chinese people are immune to heart disease, it's just that these people ate differently. Their animal product consumption was 0.5% of their calories, and in reading the study, it seems that that's just from a little lard they smear on their cooking pans. And they basically ate no animal foods at all. So the point of this is that it's not necessary for us all to risk dying in this horrible way. What about those of us Americans who have clogged arteries that look like figure A? In figure A, you can see this area here is very constricted, and in figure B, it's unconstricted. Well, of course, you would think that this was the healthy person, and years later it was constricted, but that's not the way this worked. This was a patient of Dr. Esselstyn, and in fact, the patient was a cardiologist, and over the course of 2 years, without statin drugs, but just a change of diet, without more exercise or meditation or anything else, just a change of diet, the arteries cleared up to almost full flow. In fact, 72% of his patients had their arteries open and unclogged, as proven by imaging. Now, Dr. Dean Ornish, some of you I hope have heard of his work. He also works with people with clogged arteries. He does use some exercise and some meditation techniques along with a plant-based diet. 82% of the people in his studies are getting reversal of plaque. So you're not stuck with the plaque that you have. You can reverse it. And in this case, it only took 2 years, perhaps even less, to get rid of that plaque. Now here's another way to look at heart disease. We look at the amount of blood flow in the heart muscle. If there's more red, there's more blood flow. So you can see here, after 1 year on a plant-based diet, there was much more blood flow to the heart muscle. That's what we want. Lack of blood flow to the heart muscle is what causes heart attacks. There's also less restriction shown in green. This is a restriction, and here there's much less green. 1 year on a plant-based diet made a huge difference in the amount of oxygen and nutrients and removal of used stuff from the heart. It really made a huge difference. Now, if you were to look at this picture in the top corner, what if this was the throat of a young child and you were looking in there? What would you say to yourself? Bad sore throat, inflamed, red, irritated. This is the picture of the inside of an artery with atherosclerotic disease. So this inflammation is very common, in fact universal in atherosclerotic plaque. So I'm going to give you some recent research clues on how to reduce inflammation in your bodies, in your joints, and especially in your arteries. This inflammation is just all over atherosclerotic plaque. I'm going to be mentioning medical studies and showing pictures of them on the slides. There's a study here, molecular targets of dietary polyphenols with antioxidant properties. This was in the Yonsei Medical Journal in 2005, an excellent review of the anti-inflammatory properties of plants. There's a class of compounds found in plants called polyphenols, and a subclass are the flavonoids. And one of the subclasses of flavonoids, the biggest class of polyphenols, is the flavonols. And quercetin is one of those flavonols. It's anti-inflammatory. How easy is it to get quercetin? You can eat red onions, grapes, apples, berries, or beans, especially the red beans. And then you're going to get lots of quercetin, and this is powerfully anti-inflammatory to your arteries as well as the rest of you. Inflammation plays a big role in brain disease, especially Alzheimer's disease too. So quenching inflammation throughout the whole body with something as simple as these plant foods makes a lot of sense to me. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit about omega-3s and omega-6s in a little while, but I want to mention that quercetin reduces the phospholipase in the body. In our cell membranes are stored fatty acids, and the principal fatty acids on the phospholipids of our cell membranes are arachidonic acid, a very powerful omega-6, and eicosapentaenoic acid, known as EPA, a very powerful omega-3. In most Americans, and in fact in most people, arachidonic acid is much more common than the EPA. So when phospholipase goes in and takes out these fatty acids, it's going to be taking out more arachidonic acid, which will then lead to the production of more blood clotting and arterial restriction due to thromboxanes, and more immune system action attacking the inside of our arteries due to leukotrienes. These are both eicosanoids. And I wanted to mention how that works. Now, genistein is another polyphenol. This one is an isoflavone polyphenol, and it's a very powerful anti-inflammatory. There's a picture of tofu in the corner, and that's a great way to get it. Genistein quenches inflammation by suppressing cytokines. So interleukin-6 is an example of a cytokine that increases inflammation in the blood vessels, and genistein powerfully reduces this. We're used to thinking that you need to take a pill to reduce inflammation, perhaps something as powerful as prednisone or something, an NSAID like Advil. But really, these plants are very powerful in quenching inflammation. So you can eat some soy products or other beans, peanuts, alfalfa sprouts, chickpeas, just about any kind of peas. Many of these plant foods are powerful. Genistein also suppresses LOX, which is lipoxygenase. I'm a nutritional biochemist, as Lorraine pointed out, not a medical doctor, so I love big words. So I'll tell you that lipoxygenase is something that takes the arachidonic acid, turns it into hydroperoxyeicosatetraenoic acid, which turns into inflammatory leukotrienes and makes your atherosclerotic plaque all inflamed and much worse. So that was a good word, wasn't it? There's another substance called indole-3-carbinol, a very powerful anti-inflammatory. This one is so powerful that people with Crohn's disease or irritable bowel syndrome are able to fight it using indole-3-carbinol. And what magic ways do we have to go to get this substance? Cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, green tea, common healthy things that we can integrate into our diet. Now you notice I'm starting this talk with great things that you can add to your diet without saying anything about what you might want to take out of your diet. This is to kind of relax you for what comes next. Endotoxins. Who's heard of endotoxins here? We have a show of hands for people who've heard of endotoxins? Okay, good. I'm glad that some of you have heard of them. Another name is lipopolysaccharides. What happens is, in meat or in dairy products, there are bacteria growing. And our food industry works very hard to kill the bacteria, and they're successful. The bacteria is killed. The leftover skeletons of this bacteria are lipopolysaccharides, which in a meal high in fatty acids are pulled through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream, where they create hours of inflammation. Say bacon and eggs for breakfast would create hours of inflammation because of the saturated fat and all the dead bacteria being pulled into the bloodstream. Sounds kind of yucky, doesn't it? Then, after a couple of hours, what comes next? Lunch. Okay, you get the idea. Americans can have an inflamed state just due to endotoxins most of the day and well into the evening. So you can reduce that by reducing both dairy products and animal products that might have had bacteria, which would include beef, pork, chicken, turkey, fish, and dairy products such as cheese or milk or yogurt. By the way, all of my information comes from peer-reviewed research. and from my own analysis of diets, this particular study on endotoxins was in diabetes care in 2012. So this is an emerging field that they're finding. This is new information that we're getting on what's causing some of this inflammation in arteries and in joints if arthritis is a problem. There's another substance called Neu5G, and even I don't like to say N-glucosylaminic acid. That's a real tough one to say. You see the little bluish green dots in the plaque, in the artery. That's the Neu5Gc causing inflammation. Now, it's not formed in the human body. It's not found in any plant. You have to eat either meat or milk products in order to get this in your plaque to cause this constant inflammation. The inflammation then will cause more of your inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor. All these substances will be creating inflammation and making the plaque grow faster, making the blood flow more thickly, clotting more. Okay, now it's time to find out how antioxidant kicked out the free radicals. It's an actual microscopic picture of antioxidant in a bloodstream there. She looks tough, doesn't she? Okay, now free radicals are kind of hard to describe. They're substances in our body that are able to oxygenate cells. They're very much involved with oxygenation and especially lipid peroxidation of cell membranes. For instance, in the brain, the lipid peroxidation, which is attacked by free radicals, is one of the steps in Alzheimer's disease. Antioxidants fight these free radicals by quenching them, just stopping them entirely. They can do no more damage. The damage they do extends not only to the cell membranes, but the DNA in the cell, potentially causing cancer, and many other parts of the cell too. These free radicals can also damage the LDL, which circulates through our bloodstream. If they damage them, as I'll show you in some detail, they will become oxidized and they won't be recognized by our LDL receptors anymore. And so they go round and round in the bloodstream until they stick to the inside of the wall of the artery, thus making atherosclerotic plaque thicker and worse. So what are the antioxidants? Well, this is a list of them. Vitamin A as carotenoids only. The other forms of vitamin A don't have that. And not all carotenoids are carotenes, which can be transformed into vitamin A, but they're all powerful fat-soluble antioxidants. And you know where they're found, fruits and vegetables. Vitamin C, vitamin E needs to be in the natural forms in order to be a good antioxidant. We all get mostly gamma tocopherol in our diets, and it's a natural form, whereas in pills, it's almost universally a synthetic form of alpha tocopherol, which is not useful. In fact, perhaps a little bit damaging. Now, polyphenols, I introduced you to a few, genistein and quercetin. There's large groups of polyphenols, and they're generally antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. And they occur in plants, but not in animal food. And then we make our own antioxidants inside our bodies. We have superoxide dismutase and glutathione peroxidase, and these need minerals or they won't work. It's necessary cofactors for their function. For instance, we looked at people with Alzheimer's disease and they were low in selenium because their glutathione peroxidase had used it all up, detoxifying this oxidation in their brain, the free radicals. This is a pictorial representation of where you can get vitamin C or vitamin A in the form of carotenoids. Looks good, doesn't it? So if your plate looks like that, if your grocery cart looks like that, then I just feel like you're going to be healthier. Now, this is a picture of an LDL. It's really not cholesterol. There's cholesterol on the inside of the LDL. The outer shell is made up of phospholipids, very similar to the outer shell of a cell membrane. The phospholipids have a water-soluble head that's compatible with a watery environment of the bloodstream, and it's designed as a little egg to carry fats through the bloodstream. LDL is manufactured by the liver. It's called VLDL, or very low density lipoprotein, when it's first made, and it's largely triglycerides. As it circulates, it locks onto LDL receptors, and the triglycerides and cholesterol are pulled out, and then it winds up having more cholesterol, and it's called LDL. Now you notice that there's vitamin E implanted in the membrane. That's done by the liver, preferentially with alpha tocopherol, and that vitamin E protects the LDL on its journey through the bloodstream, kind of like a security guard for an armored car. The problem, though, is that, first of all, only 8% of Americans get the bare minimum of vitamin E from their diets, and that is a problem because that means they don't have armored guards on their LDL. Perhaps it's not such a coincidence that there's a heart attack every 25 seconds in America. We really do need vitamin E, and we need the natural form. Now, the synthetic form of alpha tocopherol has 8 different isomers. They're chemically similar, but structurally different. 4 of them do nothing. They're like armored guards who are out to lunch with no guns. They're useless. And 3 of the 8 forms are very much less useful. But our body doesn't know that. So our body puts any of these 8 forms onto the LDL. So only 1 in 8 LDL is protected on its journey through the bloodstream. Vitamin E was first discovered at UC Berkeley as a fertility drug. It helped rats be fertile. And vitamin E activity is still defined in that old-fashioned system as what will make rats fertile. That's not really our goal here tonight. Our goal here is to protect ourselves. One of the things that vitamin E does is it enhances the release of prostacyclin. Among all of the rapidly acting eicosanoids in the human body, prostacyclin is the most powerful. The most powerful at opening, dilating blood vessels, the most powerful in stopping overly clotting ability of blood. In other words, the perfect thing, just what you want. And vitamin E has been found to enhance blood circulation all over the body. And it also inhibits aggregation and clumping of the blood. So then the blood can go through the smaller blood vessels. And heart attack, remember, this is blood clotting at a restricted place where a flap of plaque is broken off. So the less clotting, the better, the safer you are. This is all backed up by scientific studies that I've written down below that. Vitamin E also reduces the stickiness of blood cells, decreasing the adhesion of the blood cells. So the LDL doesn't stick to the inside wall of the arteries. This is very good to stop the continuation of atherosclerotic plaque buildup. Now, these are my favorite vitamin E pills. The ones that look like almonds are in fact almonds, and the sunflower pills are sunflowers, and the walnuts are walnuts. Walnuts, by the way, are a very rich source of gamma tocopherol, a very powerful antioxidant, and especially good for keeping the blood thin and moving smoothly through the blood vessels. And as I mentioned, the synthetic form found in most supplements, not all, but most supplements, is worse than useless and should be avoided. And scientific studies have shown this as well. Now, what about a very low-fat diet? Some of the doctors I mentioned, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Dean Ornish, they both use very low-fat diets. They're trying to get the total fat as a percentage of calories down to 10%. This is very difficult to do because, well, humans crave fat. That's the main reason. But there is a slight problem with this. First of all, a very low-fat diet, vitamin E is found in fatty foods, nuts and seeds principally. And if you're not eating any nuts and seeds, your intake of vitamin E is low. My analysis of the Dean Ornish diet, the McDougall diet, and other super low-fat diets is that we're only getting 3 to 5 milligrams per day of vitamin E in the food. And you need 15 at least. That's the bare minimum. So they're not getting enough. But another problem is absorption. And this study, which was in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2004, they looked at the absorption of carotenoids from salads. And people poured on a fat-free dressing. The amount of carotenoids in the chylomicrons was negligible. They just weren't absorbing them at all. So this is going to apply to the fat-soluble nutrients. When we eat a fatty substance, it goes into our stomach, it gets churned up a little bit, then it goes into our intestines where it triggers cholecystokinin, a hormone that triggers bile release. This bile enables the fats to surround themselves around micelles. And the micelles make it so that the pancreatic lipase can get to them and digest them so they can be absorbed. But this does not happen if you don't have a fatty trigger. My solution is to have my wife make her creamy walnut dressing We pour it on the salad. We get vitamin E. We get the omega-3 fatty acid, alpha-linolenic acid, carotenoids in abundance, and they're all absorbed, and phytosterols also from the walnuts. So that's one way to do it, to make a dressing. Now, I don't recommend oils that have been completely extracted and put into bottles because so much has been lost. I have a book on dietary fats, and I call it the fat book. My wife's holding it up back there. It's a very fat book on fats. And in it, I describe digestion chapter on it. Now, which diets get antioxidants in them? If it's red on the center column, that means there wasn't enough vitamin E, and you'll see only 2 diets got enough vitamin E. A whole food vegan diet and a whole food vegan raw diet. Only those 2, because only those 2 ate nuts and seeds. None of the others did. Vitamin C, some of the diets were okay. The standard American diet and the Atkins diet didn't get enough. And a very poorly done transition vegetarian diet also did very poorly. In fact, just about the worst score on antioxidants because they're eating cheese and white flour noodles and eggs and not getting the antioxidants that they need. Carotenoids are pretty easy to get. Pumpkins, sweet potatoes, carrots, they're really pretty easy to get if you're eating a lot of plant foods, and they're amazingly good for you and your arteries and everything else. So these are the antioxidants that we make in our bodies, and I mentioned we need copper, zinc, and manganese, especially manganese for superoxide dismutase, and also selenium. Now, coenzyme Q10 is the only fat-soluble antioxidant made in the human body. The only reason that we wouldn't make it is if we're on statin drugs. Now, I'd like a show of hands on people who are not on statin drugs. Can I see people who are not? Excellent. That's one of the best showings I've ever seen. Usually half or more people in an audience are on statin drugs. It is the most profitable drug in the world, and so it's very widely used. Lowering your cholesterol with statins may not have the desired effects that you would get lowering it with food. Because if you lower it with food, you're getting a lot of plant food and antioxidants and anti-inflammatories. If you're lowering it with statins, you're just inhibiting the production of cholesterol in your body. This lady has had too many omega-3s. Increasing the alpha-linolenic acid, the plant-based omega-3 in your diet, is a great thing to do, and it's very simple. You can eat some walnuts or grind up some flax seeds, and that'll take care of it. This lowers inflammation and clotting in the body. Alpha-linolenic acid, in order to do anything good for you, has to be transformed in a 3-step process into EPA. The first step is called the limiting step, because that's where delta-6 desaturase has an enzyme that we produce, has to go in and change alpha-linolenic acid into stearidonic acid. So for people who are not producing enough EPA, they could actually take some echium seeds and grind those up and get stearidonic acid ready-made and ready to be converted with elongase and delta-5 desaturase to turn into EPA. So that could break the bottleneck for people, especially with liver problems, hepatitis C, because this is where the transformation takes place. Flax seeds, walnuts, soybeans are a good source. Green leafy vegetables have some omega-3s, but not too many. You'd need to eat a bucketful to really get enough. And pumpkin seeds, a lot of seeds are good for that. Now, I looked at various diets. The ideal ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, so that you make lots of EPA in your body and DHA, would be 3:1. But as I look down this left-hand column, I see the ratio is 9, 18, 10, 36, 21, 11 in the various diets. It's all not 3:1. It's much higher. Well, I added 2 tablespoons of ground up flaxseed powder to my analysis tool, the Diet Doctor, and reanalyzed. And it changed the balance to 2.9. We want 3. 3.7, 3.4, 4.2. It basically made the difference in every one of these diets, bad diets and good diets. And it's something you can do without giving up any favorite foods. You can add flax powder, freshly ground is best, to your food. It should not be heated, though. It's very fragile. It also raises the amount of ALA in your body, which is important for making EPA. Now, what if you wanted to increase inflammation in your arteries, in your joints, and your brain? Easy. Turkey, chicken, and eggs. That's how it's done. Turkey, chicken, and eggs, turns out, from my analysis of diets, contribute the most arachidonic acid. Now, arachidonic acid is much more powerful as an omega-6 than linoleic acid, which is a plant-based omega-6, because it has to be transformed in the body into arachidonic acid, and we make just the right amount in our bodies. Taking it in from these food products is not a good idea if you want to avoid inflammation in your arteries and in your joints and your brain and everywhere else. It even affects bee stings and your reaction to those. There's been some talk about wild animals having omega-3s. Well, I analyzed them and they don't. 0.1 gram is the most that you can get out of a grass-fed animal or wild deer, and 0.1 gram, you need 2 or 3 grams a day. It's really insignificant amount, and they have a lot of arachidonic acid. Interesting that some of the wild animals have more arachidonic acid than the feedlot animals. What about fish oil? Why can't we just take fish oil capsules for our omega-3s? Well, it's the third most popular supplement in America. Clearly, many people do. I haven't seen any mermaid tails, but there are some downsides to fish oils. They're heavily contaminated. PCBs, polychlorinated bipheноls, DDT and its breakdown product DDE, mercury dioxins, and now we're even worried a little bit about radiation from Fukushima getting into the fish. We know that it has raised the radioactivity of certain fish. We're not sure how much, how extensive that problem will be. But there's so many problems with contamination in fish that you might want to switch to an algae-based DHA or EPA if you're going to take it at all. I have a whole chapter in my fat book on how to enhance your ability to transform the plant-based omega-3 into the EPA and DHA you need in your body. So that might be the better way because rancidity is a problem. EPA and DHA are the most easily made rancid oils. It's called lipid peroxidation. They have 5 and 6 fatty acid double bonds, and each one of those double bonds super susceptible. A study in South Africa looked at the fish oil at the manufacturer before it was shipped out. 91% was rancid already. That's before bottling, shipping, storage in a store. Before you buy it, put it on your shelf. Chances of having a fish oil capsule that's not rancid are vanishingly small. Okay, he's looking through his order. Heart attack with extra cheese, heart attack with bacon, double bypass, no pickles. Hey, where's my diabetes and large stroke? It's sort of funny. This indicates that food has something to do with heart disease. We know that total cholesterol is our best predictor of heart attack risk. There are many other ways to measure cholesterol, ratios between LDL and HDL, ratios between total cholesterol and HDL, many different ways, how much small, very small LDL we have. But basically throughout the years, especially in the Framingham study, a large study, has been going on 30 years. No one in that study with the total cholesterol below 150 milligrams per deciliter has had a heart attack in 30 years of watching. So that's called the heart attack proof zone, and it's not that hard to do. You can do it with food alone. In fact, you can do it quicker and better with food than you can with statins. That's, of course, if you're willing to adapt your diet. 4 steps to reduce blood cholesterol. Obviously, eat less saturated fat in your diet. That means animal fats unless you're exposed to some coconut products like coconut oil, which is heavily saturated. So mostly animal fats in American diets. Lower oxidized cholesterol. If the cholesterol is oxidized before it enters your body, it's much more damaging. Eat more phytosterols. Phytosterols block the absorption of cholesterol. And also eat more fiber. Fiber is found only in plant foods and never in animal foods. In summary, eat a whole food plant-based diet. And there's a takeaway message from the talk. Now, I've made this a little stoplight scenario for you. On the top, we have people who are eating 15% of their calories as saturated fat. Over a period of time, their total cholesterol raised to 220 and above. Their LDL will be 160 and above. Their arteries will look like that top picture, very clogged, and their risk of heart attack will be very high. If you can reduce your saturated fats like a Mediterranean diet down to 10%, then the plaque won't really be building and it won't really be being taken away. You'll kind of be in a holding state, which is much better than getting worse. Your cholesterol might be 200 or so, your LDL might be about 130, and you're keeping the fats down to 10%. You can do better. Under 7% is what the American Heart Association recommends, and at that point you're actually starting to remove cholesterol from the inside of your arteries to start healing. Why? Because in order to do that, you need more plants, and the plants are going to have antioxidant, anti-inflammatory functions, and there will be less saturated fat that caused this clogging in the first place. Ideally, you get it below 5% of your calories as saturated fat, and then you get the green light. You can become heart attack proof at under 150. Anybody in the room have their total cholesterol under 150? We have some hands, that's good. Our videographer, Dr. Harris, also just broke 150. I'm in the 150s. I haven't broken under, but I hope the next check I will. I use the diet doctor to ascertain how much saturated fat's in my diet and in other people's diet, and you can either use this or another analysis tool for your diet to find out, because it's hard to know what your saturated fat is unless you analyze it. And this just reads it out as a percent of calories. So you can see, if it's like the Atkins diet, 23% of calories is saturated fat, arteries are clogging as fast as they can. Or if on the other hand it's 2%, then that would be one of the heart attack healing diets that has a tremendously low amount of total fat and saturated fat. Now it's interesting, on the bottom line, we have a 48% total fat, but only 6% of the calories were saturated fat. So if you're eating really good fats, you can get away with a higher amount of fats as long as the saturated fats are low. Good fats would be nuts and seeds, avocados, and olives, as opposed to oils or animal products. Journal of Nutrition had a study where they replaced just 5% of the saturated fats with unsaturated fatty acids, and it decreased heart attack risk heart disease totally by 43%. That equates, if all Americans reduced their saturated fat by 5%, 300,000 fewer heart attacks a year. Cut it in half. Now, the dietary fats affecting the lipids in your bloodstream would be, I made this little chart, it's an estimate that perhaps 75% of your risk is from saturated fats, perhaps 15% from trans fats, which are twice as bad, but we get only 1/10 as much as saturated fats. And that cholesterol also contributes to heart disease. These are the saturated fats. I thought you might like to take a look at them. Lauric acid, 12 carbon, myristic, 14 carbon, palmitic, 16 carbon, and stearic acid, 18 carbon. They're all the same except for the length. The first three, lauric, myristic, and palmitic acid, are the ones that cause atherosclerotic plaque and clogging. Stearic acid you would think would, but we have an enzyme in our bodies called delta-9 desaturase that can turn that into oleic acid, so no longer a problem. That's the olive oleic acid. Where do saturated fats come from in typical American meals? Cheese is usually top of the list. It's found in many fast foods. Cheese is all over the place. It's subsidized by the government, so it's very cheap. And hamburgers, bologna, whole milk, and whole dairy products, this is where it's found. Now there's another column, cholesterol, to the left of that. And if you look at it, you'll see that a lot of these foods have both cholesterol and saturated fat, so they're less valuable in the diet. Now, I always wonder how things happen. Why is it that saturated fats cause higher blood cholesterol? Well, here's how it works. When you eat more saturated fat, your liver makes more LDL. Starts out as VLDL and then becomes LDL. There are fewer LDL receptors and poor acceptance of LDL. So we have LDL receptors on our cell membranes, especially fat cells and muscle cells, that can bring the cholesterol into the cells, but there are fewer of them because the saturated fats are straight and they crowd out the receptors in the cell membrane. There's lots more to it than that. But the end result is that the LDL circulates longer. There's half the clearing in the blood on someone with high saturated fat diet as a low saturated fat diet. And as those LDL circulate around and around, they get oxidized, they stick to the artery wall, and they cause heart disease. There's also less cholesterol removed in bile as a result of a high saturated fatty acid intake. And there's more biosynthesis of a fatty acid that humans make. We make one saturated fatty acid, palmitic acid, a 16-carbon fatty acid. Occasionally that can be lengthened to stearic acid and then turned into oleic acid, but mostly we get, why? Because it's very compact storage of energy for times of famine. That's why we make that one. But it's not desirable in a person who already has high blood lipids. Now, in the nurses' health study, the nurses with the lowest saturated fats and the highest polyunsaturated fats were 42% less likely to have coronary artery disease. Actually, the nurses didn't eat that differently. I guess hospital food's all the same. So there wasn't a broad spectrum between the saturated fat intake. Some nurses ate a little more and some nurses ate a little less, but still there's a huge difference in the number of nurses with heart attacks and heart disease. I want to talk about how oxidized dietary cholesterol damages arteries. Let's say you fry up some eggs or some bacon or really cook any food or even eat some cheese, which has been oxidized over time. It's intentionally aged. So you have the oxidized cholesterol in the food. If you eat it, it goes into your stomach, then into your intestines, where it is absorbed. It triggers the cholecystokinin and the gall bile. It's made into micelles, broken free with pancreatic lipase, and then it's absorbed into the insides of the intestines, where it's made into chylomicrons. Chylomicrons look just like LDLs, but they're bigger, and they have a phospholipid sheath around the outside. And all of the dietary fats are transported by chylomicrons, except for some very short chain saturated fatty acid. 6, 8, and 10 length saturated fatty acids, and about half of the lauric acid are absorbed directly into portal circulation, shown here in my little diagram. The portal circulation, here's the digestion, goes directly to the liver for detoxification. But the chylomicrons go through the thoracic duct and are put into the bloodstream directly. So this oxidized cholesterol is put directly into your bloodstream. There's no vitamin E to protect it. So it's first passed through your bloodstream. It is quite possible that that could damage your arteries. So the next time you think of a cheap and satisfying egg dish, you might want to think about what it's doing to your arteries. This is a picture of a chylomicron or an LDL. They both look similar. They have signaling proteins on them. That's that big red thing on the top. The signaling protein is what allows it to dock with an LDL receptor to get the contents taken out. Once the contents are taken out, then it goes back to the liver and it's no longer a problem. But those receptors are damaged when it's oxidized. Oxidation of fats causes malondialdehyde, and malondialdehyde damages these receptors, these protein signaling areas. So then the LDL can't ever be accepted. It just goes around and around until it sticks to the artery wall and causes more atherosclerotic plaque. And the oxysterols, once they're in the plaque, are pro-inflammatory. Good idea to avoid oxidized cholesterol entirely. Now, this man went to his doctor. Whenever your cholesterol gets too high, a sensor will send out a signal that automatically locks the kitchen door and turns on your treadmill. I think we all need this. Now, another way you can reduce cholesterol without taking anything out of your diet, but in this case adding something to your diet, is phytosterols. Just the amount of phytosterols in an average plant-based diet can reduce the risk of heart disease by 10 to 20%. That's a very nice lowering of risk of heart disease just by eating phytosterols. I'll tell you what they're in just a minute. Plant sterols lock onto the same receptors in our digestion that cholesterol does. Now, this is doubly significant because our dietary cholesterol then can't be absorbed and it's excreted. But also our cholesterol is recirculated in the bile. Perhaps 1,000 or 2,000 milligrams a day of cholesterol is recirculated through bile into our intestines. If you're not eating phytosterols, that cholesterol gets absorbed along with the dietary cholesterol, and that really raises your blood cholesterol, which is what we don't want. So plant sterols, 25% less cholesterol was absorbed and more cholesterol was excreted in a diet high in phytosterols versus one that's low. This is from the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2000. Phytosterols are found most in wheat germ, interesting, also sunflower seeds and all kinds of nuts and seeds. That's where phytosterols are found. So a good idea to include a reasonable amount of nuts and seeds in your diet for the vitamin E, for the alpha-linolenic acid, for the phytosterols. Okay, this guy's going into a quick market. He says, don't you sell anything without the dreaded trans fatty acids? And the kid says, sure, we sell cigarettes. They're really in a lot of foods. The healthiest amount of trans fatty acids to eat, universally agreed upon, is 0. They raise the bad blood cholesterol, they lower the good blood cholesterol, they cut off the heart muscle energy production, they promote blood clotting, they raise fats in the body, and Americans eat twice as much in the way of trans fatty acids as all other food contaminants combined. This is going down as manufacturers are seeing that their labels are keeping people from buying their products. So perhaps it's less than that now. I certainly hope so. Now, from the New England Journal of Medicine in 2006, they said higher trans fats caused a tripling of sudden death from cardiac causes. Well, we don't want to triple our risk of heart disease. This is what trans fatty acids look like. This is normal oleic acid, an 18-carbon, one-time desaturated fatty acid. And this is transoleic acid. You notice it's straight, just like a saturated fatty acid. This change in structure is one of the problems with trans fatty acids. They are absorbed and metabolized just like other fatty acids, but they interfere with other processes in the body. Now, where do they come from? Cookies, cakes, crackers, that kind of thing, about 40% in Americans. But did you know that 21% of trans fats come from animal products? Does anyone know that they come from animal products too? It's a process called biohydrogenation, where in the rumen of cattle and goats, the oils are converted into trans fats, the same trans fats as are found in hydrogenated oils made during the hardening of liquid oils. It varies by populations who gets the most trans fats from which sources. From cheese and beef in Australia, they eat a lot of cheese and beef and not so much hydrogenated oil, so they get 60% of their trans fats from animals. In America, it's only 21%. Canada, it's about 50-50. And for us folks here, it just depends how much we eat of these two kinds of food, how much we'll get our trans fats from them. In other words, what I'm saying is to avoid trans fats, you would have to avoid beef and all dairy products to avoid all trans fats, which everyone agrees you must do. And are they different trans fats? They're all the same. This chart lists 99% of the trans fats in foods, and they are the same trans fats. It's a little more vicinic acid in dairy products and a little more elytic acid in hydrogenated oils, but they're all the same and they're all very damaging. So if you want to avoid them all, then you have to avoid some foods that are really damaging to health in so many other ways. But not fish, by the way. Fish don't biohydrogenate. We're almost done with the dietary part of this. His doctor is telling him that if you take an aspirin a day and you would take it out for a run, then take it to the gym, then take it for a bike ride, that aspirin's going to do you a lot of good. And aerobic activity is excellent. I'm on a running program. I ran today, and it feels great. It's a great way to burn extra fats in your body, and it reduces stress because you get more relaxed after you exercise. And it's really, really healthy for your heart to pump it. It's like if your car sat in the garage its whole life and never drove at full speed. Your body needs to go up to full speed once in a while too. Of course, if you overdo an exercise program, all of a sudden, especially in middle or older age, that's a great way to get a heart attack. So I do want to mention that any program of exercise should be started gradually, and if you have any heart problems, of course, you should have your doctor define for you limits of pulse and activity levels and check you out on a treadmill. I think the best way to check your exercise and activity is to make a record of it. Every day for a week, write down what you do in the way of activity and exercise, climbing stairs, walking across parking lots, mowing the lawn, whatever you do. If all the pages are blank, then you need more. It's really easy to tell. And you can fine-tune it that way too. All kinds of fitness exercises are healthy for your heart. So rebounding is tremendously good for circulating fluids because remember, our veins and our lymph systems don't have a pump. They're pumped by activity and motion, and it's very important. Aerobics are one kind, and then there's strengthening, Tai Chi and yoga. Yoga's especially nice because you go upside down and circulate the fluids in your body once in a while. It's excellent for health. Dancing, fun, walking is a great way to just stay healthy. So I encourage all of us, myself included, to keep getting off the chair and out there and working out. By the way, stress raises blood cholesterol. They did those psychology tests where they put people in an elevator and the elevator jams between floors and they're all scared. They take their cholesterol before and after, and they find their blood cholesterol has gone up. I had to send the research to Dr. Greger when I told him this because he didn't believe it at first. But the fact is that our bodies are very smart. And what is cholesterol used for? Adrenal hormones, like adrenaline, corticosteroids. So our bodies, when we're in a state of stress, put more, our liver puts more cholesterol in the bloodstream so that it can supply the adrenals with the necessary precursors to make hormones. So it's better to be relaxed. And for me, the best way to relax is exercise. Other great ways are hot tubs, hot baths, massage, any kind of loving energy of any kind. These are great ways to relax and an important part of a healthy heart program. So here's what I've covered today. To lower saturated fats, go plant-based. My wife's got a cookbook with some amazingly healthy, delicious recipes. I've described to you why you might want to change, and she can show you how to do it in a way that I guarantee you is non-painful from a palate standpoint. You might want to consider getting more omega-3s from walnuts and flax, but avoiding bottled oils as much as possible. I often get asked which bottled oils are best, and it'd really be best to avoid them altogether. If you need a little bit to lubricate a pan, perhaps sesame oil would be one to go with. Antioxidants, eat all the fruits, vegetables, beans, and nuts you can. Make those the basis of your diet, and they're so nutrient rich. Now you notice I don't mention grains in here. They're also good, but not as rich in nutrients as fruits, vegetables, beans, and nuts. To reduce inflammation, go plant-based. People in my arthritis class are amazed at the reduction in inflammation in just a week or two by switching over to more plants and dropping turkey, chicken, and eggs too. Trans fats, try to avoid junk food and eat whole plants, keep fit, and that's my way to have no more heart attacks. Thank you.